Hello and welcome to another A-Tippling Philosopher video, an ATP Geopolitics video, my other channel. But this is being hosted on my main channel due to technical issues. But nonetheless, I'm super excited to speak to a Ukrainian, Orest Zub, today, who has obviously a working understanding of the Ukraine war, living in it, experiencing it, and talking to so many people involved in the war. And we're going to have probably a wide-ranging conversation today, touching on many subjects, starting off with obviously, what he's doing, who he is, and how he's approached dealing, with the war and the information space that is this war. Before maybe broadening out to talk about many other subjects. So first of all, look, welcome. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hello, thanks for having me, and it's a pleasure to share some of my views, some of my experience, right from the fields where I am now. Yeah.
Indeed. Well, actually, that's a good place to start. So where are you now?
Now, like in this very place and this very time, I'm in my apartment. This is actually my bedroom because my wife is occupying the living room. And I'm in Lviv. This is the largest city in Western Ukraine, which remained relatively safe during the entire 2022 when the full-scale invasion in Ukraine broke out. Yeah, you can just show it on the map now. So basically, this is the central, the biggest logistical hub, and historically the most important place in this part of Ukraine, which stands out by population. Like it's around 1 million people. Basically, all roads in Western Ukraine lead to Lviv. It's possible to tell like this. And we can develop the topic as well. So basically, outside of the war zone, Lviv is the most heard and the most dominant place where the most things happen actually now during in Ukraine. Yeah.
And I presume that's because it's the safest, and therefore, along with it being the safest, I guess you've had a lot of internally displaced people, IDPs. You've had a lot of internally displaced, sort of internal refugees, if you like, going to Lviv or through Lviv in order to get to other countries and outside of Ukraine. But I guess you've had a lot of businesses setting up in Lviv where it's safer, that previously were more towards the east or center. Is that right?
Absolutely. So if like the viewers, they just seen the map, they could realize that Lviv is like on the west. And I mean, you cannot miss the city if you want to travel between Ukraine and any other Western European country. Yes. So all the highways, all the train, they go through there, basically. Even before the war, Lviv, as one of the largest cities in Ukraine, was an important hub for culture, for history, for economy, and so on. But now, since the war broke out, the full-scale war broke out, it started playing even like more dominant role in the economy and politics of Ukraine. So just to give you the idea, during the first month when Kyiv was under siege, most of the embassies and headquarters of international companies moved to Lviv, when the capture of the capital was under threat. So basically, we experienced here a big melting pot, which usually happens on the edges of the war zone in many countries around the world. And now when Kyiv became much safer, many companies came back to the city, but Lviv still plays a very, very important role in general, during this war times. Also, during the initial phases of the invasion, most of the refugees going west, and it's been recorded that over 5 million people found a shelter in like different European Union countries. They passed through Lviv, and during the entire month, approximately 50,000 people were transferring through our city. Basically, we are talking here about millions of people that were processed. And around 200,000 people, IDPs, internally displaced people, found their new home in Lviv, which in some sense boosted the local economy. It's weird to say in those senses, but if you look at Lviv, so for example, I can try to, I'll do like this. This is like one of the central places of our city.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah. So it looks very active. There are many businesses. That open up, as you told. Even me, as a native Lviv citizen, I'm pretty surprised to see absolutely new networks, business networks that appear here. Like, for example, the new chain of restaurants that never been in the city, but which was pretty widespread and popular in the east of the country, for example. So yeah. So
and I guess with that, I mean, you've got the challenges of refugees anyway, and even internally displaced people, because you do have different subcultures within a whole culture. You do have different people have different needs and identities and all sorts going on, and you're going to welcome those people in. But I guess you'd also get challenges with that. Suddenly you've got 200,000 people there. You've got, ideas of security, safety for all involved. You've got, people thinking, oh, I'm not sure about these outside, because at the beginning you'll be thinking, yeah, let's welcome everyone. Then there'll be like in group, out group, sort of insiders. We're Lviv, these people aren't Lviv, and I guess you're going to have all of these things going on the whole time.
Absolutely, and we can talk about this. So the biggest pressure on the local infrastructure and economy happened during March, when all the people were coming. And, this when we start having much worse traffic jams in the city. Suddenly you had to accommodate 200,000 people somewhere, and usually the gyms of the schools or some, adapted dormitories for students have been shifted to provide the needs of local refugees. Yeah, and at some point the entire logistics chains were interrupted because you could not import some stuff from the east of the country. Many businesses have to change their operation and get it from Poland or from like other neighboring European Union countries, which actually inflated the prices in many cases. And there are many things like this. Also the cultural aspect is very important. For those, we can dig a little bit historical. So for many centuries, western and eastern part of Ukraine were kind of divided between other more dominant geopolitical powers. So we are talking about here that west of Ukraine was mostly influenced by Poland or Austria in the last centuries, while the center and east was heavily influenced by Russia, definitely. And here also you have these cultural things that you have to adapt to each other. But in general, the circumstances our country found ourselves at the moment, and this war unified the entire nation like never before. So
it's so interesting that's often the case where and it's sad that the one thing that will definitely unify a nation to all come together is an external threat. And I've written a piece on this before where I've said really the only way we're going to unify the whole world is if we're attacked by aliens type thing, because an external threat is a really strong unifier. I know that
you can see this in all apocalyptic movies, when the aliens attacking the earth, and then you have the same uprisings from New York to Shanghai to Moscow, Istanbul, and so on. So yeah,
and what's interesting, right at the very beginning of the conflict, of the war, I wrote an article saying that Putin wanted to kind of eradicate the identity of Ukraine, but everything he did worked in the exact opposite. So what he did is he unified Ukraine, and this was evident right at the beginning. He unified Ukraine, and people came together, and suddenly everyone knew about the Ukrainian flag, everyone knew about Ukrainian geography, everyone knew about what's going on and who these people are, who Zelensky was, what the political situation was in Ukraine. What he did in invading Ukraine to wipe it off the face of the earth, kind of culturally and in terms of its identity, he actually enforced that identity and threw that identity out to the wider world. And it was just incredibly.
That's a good point, and I want to add here as well that he united not only Ukrainians, but he united the entire world. So basically, he wanted to, to put Europe into the very uncomfortable position, but European Union became very united and very with the same goal as never before. He wanted. One of his objections was to push borders of NATO further back, but with Finland and Sweden joining, he even attached them closer. So basically, everything went wrong, like opposed the initial idea of Mr. Putin, and that's what we are seeing now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. And look, we haven't even given yourself a proper introduction here, but I'm interested. You will have a better handle on Eastern Europe, right? And you're going to have neighboring countries or close neighbors who will have greater or lesser sympathies for Russia. You recently went and did, and let me throw on your channel here, but you recently met up with someone who volunteered, a Croatian who volunteered. This is a video here, and this is your channel. Please go and everyone subscribe to Orest Zub. You interviewed him. He volunteered as a sympathizer for your cause. But are there countries, you've also been to Serbia, I believe, are there countries that are more or less supportive of, or more supportive of Russia? And why is that? And is that changing, or do they become even more staunchly supportive of Russia?
Mm-hmm.
And again, Hungary might be an example here.
Sure, that's a very interesting topic, and basically here we can touch a little bit of my background. So basically, during this time of war, of entire 2022, I was visiting myself the frontline areas of Ukraine, but at the same time, I traveled to the neighboring countries around Ukraine, basically all of the countries that touch the border of Ukraine, and I was meeting local activists, was talking on the media, trying to spread the message from Ukraine as much as possible, participating in the conferences and so on. And I visited Croatia, Serbia, Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, Poland, you name it. Everything what is in this neighborhood, yeah. So it's possible to tell briefly about everyone, but if you touch Croatia, the ties between Ukraine and Croatia are very strong. Like Ukraine was the first country which recognized the independence of Croatia back in 1992. Then Croatia faced similar unjustified war in the 90s when when the Yugoslavia was breaking apart. Croatia proclaimed independence, and Serbia, Yugoslavia back then still didn't want to let them leave, so invaded the country. Croatia was resisting for 4 years, and eventually they restored their full integrity within the borders of the former Croat Republic within Yugoslavia by 100%. So it's a good inspiration for us in this sense.
Right, that's a really nice parallel.
Yeah. Then the original tribe of white Croats, which later formed the modern nation of Croatia, actually originates from Ukraine. And their capital was founded not far from Lviv, like half an hour drive from here. So there are many ties between Croatia and Ukraine in general. That's why they are so supportive and so friendly. And this is like, I encourage everybody to watch the interview with the Croat volunteer fighter on my channel that Jonathan just featured, just to take a look and try to understand the philosophy behind it. Also, there's like the counterpart. There is Serbia nearby, right? And Serbia is the only European country which didn't join the sanction package previously, when all other countries did. Yeah. And I visited Serbia for my own curiosity, and in order to participate in the conference for media, for journalists, where we were developing the media narrative, how to explain the Serbian society relation to Ukraine and war and so on. Because historically, Serbia was always backed by Russia, starting from the middle of the 19th century, when Russia kind of helped to liberate Serbia from the Ottoman Empire. So basically, thanks to big Russia, Serbia became independent. The same happened during World War I, when Austria invaded Serbia, Russia invaded Austria, and so they have very long historical positive, from their point of view, relations with Russia. And when I was actually speaking, I also encourage everybody to watch that video. I was speaking with the local guy who works in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Serbia. Like, why do you why do you support Russia on the international scale? And he told me, because we don't have a negative experience with Russia, as opposed to every Baltic country, Ukraine for many centuries, Poland, and so on. And the reason that they don't experience bad things doesn't mean that the bad things will not happen. Because I told him, look, and like as soon as the Russian boot steps on the Serbian land, you will feel the same what we felt. And also, what I noticed, Serbian national psyche goes very deep into the like pan-Slavinism, we are Slavs, Orthodox, and so on. So for them, it's kind of like sorry to see that two Slavic countries are clashing now. You like Ukraine, actually like two biggest Slavic nations are clashing between each other, right? Ukraine and Poland, and they cannot figure out like why are we doing this. For them, it might seem very far distant, like all the complication mechanism which was within Bosnia. Many people don't understand it either. But the case of war between Russia and Ukraine is very different. It's one of those unique examples when most people can see black and white. When one country is simply invading absolutely innocent another independent state. However, the crucial point here, what I noticed from the Serbian standpoint, is that NATO is backing Ukraine. And Serbia has very painful experience with NATO when NATO bombed entire like Serbian infrastructure and economy after like Serbians invaded Kosovo, right? So they still, it's a recent story. Every person takes it very personally. So from their point of view, it's not actually like between Ukraine and Russia, they choose Russia and they support Russia. No, they would rather not choose. But because NATO supports Ukraine and they are anti-NATO, they tend to rely more on the Russian side. Like this is the point of view I noticed in Serbia. From the rest of all other countries, population predominantly support Ukraine. I'm talking about Romania, Bulgaria, and Hungary.
Even Hungary. So is it only because this is all very fascinating so far? Thank you. This is like a history, a geopolitical lesson. So thank you. Every day's a school day. So like Hungary, I see Orban as just a carbon copy of Putin, right? In the way that he's going about his tinkering with the democracy there. So they're on a democratic backslide. They're moving away from democracy, and he's playing around with the freedom of press. He's playing around with the democratic principles and mechanisms of Hungary to give himself the power and aligning himself with Russia and getting in people around him who are pro-Russian as well. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the people on the ground are pro-Russian. So have you experienced anything?
That's what I told. Like Orban won, but by very marginal difference on his elections. And this is a classic story when, let's say, it's a like populist version, right? So most of my friends who are in Hungary, they are intellectual, educated people of business and science and so on. I know 0 people from my network in Hungary who voted for Orban. So even if you look at the map, you will see that the economically prosperous and educated Budapest is voted for against Orban, as opposed to the rural area which is around. Yeah. But
this is very classic, of course. The kind of difference in I mean, I could really get boring about the difference in politics of rural and urban areas and how that really informs, urban areas and the bucolic sort of farmland heartlands. I mean, you look at how Nazism like rose in Germany, and you see how those kind of authoritarian regimes rise in different places. There's a strong reliance on the golden days of the bucolic sort of rural past and all of this, and the urban kind of the modernized urban intellectuals are the bad guys and everything. And actually you can see it even in politics of the Britain and the US, where you've got a divide along urban and rural lines with parties there as well. So yeah, a lot to say about
and
that.
And with Mr. Orban, he's in the politics of Hungary for the last 30 years, leading it actually. I don't like, it's possible to touch a very sensitive topic regarding Hungary, but and on the national level, they still have like many scars from the outcome of World War I, when Hungary lost like 2/3 of its prior territory, and like millions of Hungarians found themselves eventually outside the borders of Hungary. So I mean that is already playing with fire over here. So let's move to Ukraine maybe.
Yeah. No, sure. So it's just interesting to get an idea of where the sympathies lie around Ukraine, because it frustrates me that it isn't the black and white that you and I probably see it as. And am I being simplistic in just saying Putin and Russia are the bad guys? Or is it really that obvious? To me, it seems that obvious. But then
also,
you add in,
it's important to tell from the Hungarian standpoint, if we put aside like cultural and political stuff, also economically, Hungary is one of those countries that had the biggest percentage of its economy completely relying on Russian gas, like up to 90%, which is marginally bigger than other countries around. So they really depend on it as well.
Yeah.
And as my like good friends who are pro-Ukrainian and they have some of their businesses, they tell that like if you simply switch off the pipeline, the entire economy collapses, and then it affects the situation in the country, and obviously it affects the future voting, and so everybody is trying to cover their own back.
And it's a really good point, because Germany got a lot of hassle for being so reliant on Russian fossil fuels, and we in the British media were having a go at Germany as if like we had chosen not to have Russian fossil fuel. Like we're an island, and so we were probably never going to get Russian fossil fuels. But if they came and offered it to us really, really cheap, you can bet that we would have gone, yeah. Like it's easy to moralize when you're not having to make these really huge economic decisions. And so the thing is that Germany and Hungary are in these positions where they are reliant, and what's happened before is irrelevant. Like if you turn off the gas now, you will turn people against Ukraine essentially. So it's such a difficult thing to manage.
But it's still impossible. It's still impossible to have a close eye on Hungary, because, for example, Hungary even is not permitting to use Hungary as the transit point for armor support of Ukraine. So like everything to Ukraine goes through Poland, through Slovakia, or through Romania. So Hungary doesn't even give the railway network to transfer arms. And I mean that's we are at this point of the war that anything can happen, and it can go in so many different directions.
I know. I was going to, we'll be leading to where you think it's going to go. But I'm interested in this kind of pro-Russian sentiment. So we talked about Eastern Europe, but I'm absolutely fascinated in the Donbas, right? And so let's rewind a little bit. What was, first of all, before we get to Donbas, what did you think about whether the war was going to happen before the war happened, right? So before February the 24th, you, Orest Zub, like, did you believe the UK and US intelligence? Were you on, or did you believe the narrative that Zelensky and the government were presenting, that it's not going to be a threat? How did you in the public see the Russian threat?
For many years before, I knew it will start into the full scale war. So really? For me, it was the question of when, not if. And you don't have to be a specialist in geopolitics. Who am I not? You just take a look at the map. And you briefly review previous few centuries of history, and you understand that it has to develop somehow, right? And since 2014, Ukrainian question was kind of unresolved, because we had this stalemate in the east with in the Donbas, the Crimea, nobody recognizing anything, situation not developing. So there had to be some kind of solution of this thing. Yeah, and unfortunately, our civilization is showing that such solutions are happening in the armed conflict when no parties can agree on a settlement. What I must admit I didn't expect is how actually the war will develop. because, like, I never experienced the war myself. So even though I traveled extensively around the world, I've been to over 120 countries on all continents. I visited many conflict zones in West Africa, in Karabakh, Kashmir, Palestine. I mean, many, like most countries in Latin America and so on. But visiting another country and seeing some trans-border skirmishes or some uprisings is absolutely different when you have like full-scale invasion over land with massive troops, tanks, with rockets flying through the country. That was pretty crazy. So I must admit, I was expecting the war to start, and this war I seen as the massive escalation in Donbas. However, in my wildest dreams, I could not imagine like invasion on Kyiv from Belarus, for example. Like that was like absolutely crazy to see this happening. And like every day we are watching on the map with red these tapes kind of occupying Ukraine. So that was pretty frightening.
Yeah, so and then that leads on to the Donbas. So I'd be really interested in what your opinion here is, because the Donbas is a problem going forward because there is pro-Russian sentiment in the Donbas, and we can talk about why that might be. You can give us a little bit of political history, possibly. But when I have either pro-Russian voices or sometimes bots or whatever, like on my YouTube threads or anywhere I'm talking about the war, they often say, if I say, look at the terrible war crimes of the Russia, look at the Dnipro missile, the missile that's just wreaked havoc on an apartment building in Dnipro, and then they say, yeah, but Donbas, since 2014 has been bombed. Why don't you ever say anything about Donbas being bombed for 8 years? And I was like, that is not. So I argue that's not an equivalence. It's a false equivalence. It is not the same thing as throwing a massive missile at residential areas and the war crimes that have been committed. But what would you say as a Ukrainian to that kind of argument that actually this is all justified because of the Donbas?
This is actually a very interesting narrative, because until February 24th of 2022, I never heard this message, like that Ukrainians are bombing Donbas. Like I was in Donbas, I was visiting those areas before the escalation, and I believe this is like the propaganda message from the Russian forces that started as the counteroffensive to defend themselves, to justify the invasion and so on. Because to tell you like the truth, I never heard this kind of story before February 2022. The story with Donbas is that from 2015 all the way until the start of full-scale invasion, there was a stalemate. It was digged in with the local shootings. Like it never happened that there is like these rocket stations flying and hitting Donetsk or Lugansk or something else. I believe if they're telling this, it's important to provide the facts. Like every missile attack which comes on Ukrainian soil is documented. There are pictures, there are press coming, investigators. Show me at least one investigation of Ukrainian missile attack of Donbas between 2014 and the recent year, and then we can speak about this.
Yeah, and even if you could even find a stray missile, like the sheer volume, the difference is just unbelievable. Anyway, so
there is also an interesting part, like even after invasion in Donbas and after annexation of Crimea, many high-profile bloggers in Ukraine, like travel bloggers, showbiz, and so on, they are like native Russian speakers. So basically their product was going over Russia, Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and like all we call it like Russian-speaking world. Yeah, I'm a native Ukrainian speaker, by the way. So I was always living in the media sphere of the West. Like for me, Russian culture is the same distance as Turkish culture, for example.
Right.
Yeah. And they So when Russia invaded Ukraine, and then we started to resist, and all the world starts screaming about this, then we start hearing this narrative like, what about Ukraine bombing Donbas for the last 8 years? And then there was a response from these Ukrainian, Russian-speaking top media personalities, and they all started like recording videos and answering like, what I've been doing for the last 8 years, because they tell, why did you keep silent? Why did you keep silent for the last 8 years? And they start telling that like, for the last 8 years, I was giving concert, I was living, I was traveling, but I never hear Ukraine bombing Donbas. So like, why are you even asking this?
So there was almost like a war going on, but it wasn't all-consuming. It was just almost like over there in little parts of the Donbas.
Okay,
but it didn't affect all of the Donbas, and it certainly didn't kind of filter through and affect the lives of people living in, say, Lviv and Kyiv.
So yeah, I can respond on this because it was already my conscious of, like, I was already old enough to understand and to filter things. So everybody knows that in late 2013 there started an uprising in Ukraine, which were pro-European. So basically, the official foreign policy of Ukraine since 2004, when we had our first revolution, Orange Revolution, and which was a peaceful one with 0 casualties. I was 16 years old and I was participating back then. So since 2014, the official foreign policy of Ukraine was European Union integration. And then 2 weeks before the scheduled meeting to sign the association agreement in Vilnius, our back then President Yanukovych is pulling back. He said like, no, like, it's not beneficial to us. We're going to sign economic union with Russia and Kazakhstan.
And is that because he was being primed by Putin and Russia?
Yeah. So obviously all the people were fierce, like, why? Like, we were waiting to go west. Students started going on the streets and so on, which later turned into the Euromaidan, like Euro Square revolution. Yeah, and that already was violent. Everybody remembers February 1819, when up to 200 people were basically shot by snipers in the center of Kyiv.
Is it Bekhut? Is it the
special forces back? Yeah. This obviously, like, the entire nation stood off and swept the government, and president fled and so on. And during this few days of power vacuum in the country, Putin used the chance to annex Crimea and start invading Donbas, because he realized that the country is getting out of his control. Yeah, Crimea was annexed very, very fast without possibility to fight back from the Ukrainian side. But already the land invasion from Donbas was an open land war, and for like at least 1 year there were serious fights. So if now, for example, you open the map, like the war map of Ukraine, where we can see the front line, I'm going to tell you how it developed. Yeah. Okay. So the purple is the color of areas which became under control of so-called Donetsk and Lugansk republics after the active war in Donbas, and these borders were locked in 2015. They in 2014 they were even more successful, so they were going further west. And for example, Kramatorsk and Slovyansk, which are major cities in Donbas and which are now under Ukrainian control, and they have not been captured. So they're like a few dozen kilometers north of Bakhmut. Yeah. They were already occupied. Yeah. They were already occupied by Russian troops. But then the Ukrainians fought back. They recaptured Kramatorsk and Slovyansk and area around. And these purple borders is what started since 2015 all the way until the recent invasion. So basically, for 6 years, everybody was digged in. and the front line was not moving, and it was like basically people could even travel back and forth and so on. But the red colors are already the result of the recent invasion in the start of 2022.
Yes, exactly. So, and I'm interested then in if and when Ukraine liberates that area, so that, you know, assuming that Zelensky's maximalist objectives are achieved, which is to say all of the colored areas, purple and sort of red, are liberated and Ukraine take back control. What I can see Crimea being easier culturally, because a lot of people are shipped into Crimea from Russia, and I guess they'll be shipped, kind of, they would leave if that got liberated again, and you would get a lot of people who left Crimea coming back to Crimea, and it's the same happened in the Donbas. But I get a sense that there's possibly more localized sympathy for Russia in the Donbas. What do you think would happen if the Donbas was liberated? I mean, how do you go about, because I would assume most of the people actually living there who haven't fled already, people who would have been pro-Ukrainian would have fled. So most of the people there are going to be pro-Russian. How do you deal with that? I mean, that's a huge challenge.
This is very huge challenge. To tell the truth, I don't know exactly, and it's hard for me to give the advices how to deal here. And I believe like there are a few solutions, yes, and we can see like the violent solution and more soft and so on. So we mentioned Croatia over here, yeah. So if you actually, now you can also see like War of Croatia map, and we can see it over here. And everybody who's watching this video, they will see that basically Yugoslav army occupied those parts of Croatia that had the Serbian majority of people. So basically, let's say 80% of population of captured areas of Croatia where Serbian people lived. Yeah. However, it was within the administrative borders of Croatia. So what happened there, when Croatian army regained those territories back, they simply pushed, like many houses of Serbian were destroyed and Serbian people had to leave. That's made, that like cleaned the population of the area, which became predominantly Croatian through the entire country, with with solving a problem of future uprisings and so on. Yeah. My family, for example, I'm originally from Ukrainian, let's say my grandparents are from the Ukrainian villages, which used to be in Poland before World War II. But when the borders between Soviet Union and Poland changed, so basically Poland was shifted west, up to 1 million Ukrainians found themselves in newly formed Polish Republic. And even more than 1 million Poles found themselves in newly formed Ukrainian Soviet Republic within the Soviet Union. So what happened in 1946 and 47, after World War II finished, there was a mutual agreement between the Soviet Union and the Polish Soviet, Socialist Republic, to exchange population, which basically means a forceful deportation of people from their native places where their families used to live for centuries before. Yeah, but this prevented a future ethnical problems, as always were happening previously in the history. So
that second one. So the first option is violent. We're going to literally push you out. You can go and live in Russia.
Yeah.
Second option is to say, right, we're going to give you a choice. If you really are pro-Russian, you can go and live in Russia, and anyone who's been filtered into Russia through these filtration camps,
exactly,
can because you would assume if at the end of the war that Putin wouldn't be in charge and there'll be some kind of change of government or some kind of change of leader, so there'll be at least an attempt to solve this in this kind of way. So assuming that, then you say, right, let's have this agreement so that anyone who wants to be a Ukrainian living in the Donbas can be a Ukrainian living in the Donbas, and then anyone who doesn't want to be a Ukrainian living in the Donbas can, go to Russia type thing.
Exactly. So this, and then there's a third solution, which is more like a softer, I would say. It's actually very interesting. So in the Baltic countries, especially in Estonia and Latvia, there is up to 30% of Russian ethnical minority, which is huge, for such a small nations, which are under 2 million people, Estonia and Latvia. So they have the institution of so-called like non-citizen or like alien citizen, which means that you can live in this country, you have access to all the public services, economy, you can have a job, you can even travel within the European Union because you're a permanent resident of European Union country. But in order to be able to vote and in order to be able to work in the public institutions like government, court, and so on, you have to pass the exam for history, you have to study the native Latvian or Estonian language, and then like if you passed those, you're like welcome in all parts of the life. Otherwise, you are not able to participate in those crucial nation-forming decisions. Because if they would not happen, you always have a surplus of 30% vote results toward Russia, which is very, very dangerous for those countries. So some specialists in Ukraine, they also developed this idea. When Ukraine will capture Donbas, there will be many people who lived for the last decade outside of Ukrainian control. So even more, like there are children who were born during occupation and who already enrolled into the secondary school without a single connection to Ukrainian country in general.
Wow, yeah.
So it's very important stuff, because it goes to the generations. So if they want to stay, okay, you stay, but unless you pass like national exam, history exam, unless you study the Ukrainian language, you cannot vote and you cannot participate in the political life of the country.
And I guess it's the most important thing, especially for these young people, is to deliver that kind of plan in a way that doesn't sow resentment in those young people or in any of the population. Like you want them not to go, I really hate doing this, I don't want to do this, and therefore I'm going to be resentful, and therefore I'm going to be anti-Ukrainian, I'm going to be living here. But it's like trying to sell the positives of this rather than enforcing it on them. But yeah, that's really interesting set of options there.
Mm-hmm. Another question is that like what to do there like physically, because I'm not sure like if many people realize how badly destroyed is Donbas now. I visited those areas personally a few times. You're welcome to watch videos on my channel. Obviously, I try to not only to show situation from my room, but I actually physically go to places and you see the geography, landscape, and so on. You start to understand this much better. I'm talking about the size of Wales, which is completely ruined. Like this, it's impossible to realize unless you see the entire horizon with the destroyed buildings. And before the war, Donbas was the most densely populated area of Ukraine. So we are talking about like those cities that you see around there, they can have over 100,000 people. So Bakhmut is like 150,000 before the war. Kramatorsk is more than 100,000. So if you zoom in,
unfortunately, I can't zoom on this map any further, but yeah, I will zoom in on a Google map.
You can do it on the Google. People don't realize how big are the towns. So like anything, let's say you don't even see them on the map. Like between Bakhmut and Kramatorsk, there is Drushkivka, Pokrovske, Konstantinivka. All those towns are almost 100,000 people of the pre-war population. So it's an area with a lot of people, with a lot of urban development there, and now it's in ruins. And this something I cannot realize how to get rid of the trash, how to build it. This is like very, very tough topic.
Yeah, it's so. I mean, I've talked a number of times about what do you do with places like Solid or Mariinka is a great example. So Mariinka is a fairly sizable place, and it's just a hellscape. It's an apocalyptic landscape, and the only thing you can do is entirely knock these places down and start again. I mean, but that's so many of these places. Vuhledar, I know it's a lot smaller, but still, you look at it, that's going to have to be entirely knocked down and started again. It's just, and that's on and on and on all throughout the land. It's desperately sad, obviously, but of course, you know, you got the challenges involved as well because this is a hugely industrial area. It's the industrial heartland of Ukraine, as was, and so you're going to have to. If people are generally happy, if they've got good jobs and they've got motivation, and so it's all linking this in with the economy, with employment, and then with the welfare state, and that just has an awful lot of work to be done after this.
I think that, you know, the story what we have now in Ukraine is because of the scale of it, and this is something new that our civilization didn't approach before, because in the last 100 years, look, yes, after World War II, there was never such a big migration of people in such a short period of time. This is one. So we have like the huge empty spaces there. Yeah, entire Donbas prospered 100 years ago based on the coal and heavy industry, which is becoming less and less relevant in the 21st century. You know, so it's even like it will be probably pointless to rebuild a coal mine again if we start to rely for different sources of energy. The place,
which just sorry to interrupt, but it's really interesting when Zelensky and his government have been positioning themselves to be forward looking. So they're saying we're in the middle of the war, but we're still going to send people to the climate conference. We're still going to be we want to be involved in green technology or in like future technology. So I think that's very clever and savvy of him to realize that if we are going to contribute to the future of Europe, if we are going to be a player on the global scene, right, we can't be going, right, we need to rebuild the coal mines and this and that. We need to be thinking about how can we, as this innovative population of people who have shown that they can problem solve in a war, who have got these transferable skills, how can we be seen to be players that are useful players on the global marketplace? So I think he's doing quite a good job to actually place Ukraine in the future.
Yeah, this will be, you know, and you know, war is a destructive force, and there is always something new after the war. So of course now we have to focus on the battlefield and to restore the territory and the justification and so on. But some like new bright ideas will develop there. I believe Ukraine, on one side now it's a playground for global military devices and other stuff, but also it will be a playground for very ambitious infrastructural projects, I believe, you know, for agrarian projects. I see so many international organizations that under the umbrella of humanitarian aid are pushing their technology and trying to lock their interest in Ukraine at the moment, for other, like, to participate in the future political life. So this is like something very, very interesting happening, and you know, it's very interesting to observe. It's very interesting to participate. Obviously, in the short run, this is crazy. This is terrible. People die every day, and nothing can be worse than the war. But if we think with centuries, like 100 years or even 200 years,
there could be a silver lining to the cloud. Yeah,
this will make the world a better place. I think so.
Interesting. And Neil asks here, how did the Germans rebuild after the war? And someone then replies, Lorna Morgan says, Marshall Plan, US and allies heavily invested in rebuilding. So this is the idea that no matter what, Ukraine will need help to rebuild. They will need investment, inward investment from abroad. They will need a lot of assistance. The only thing you don't want is Ukraine to then be in the pockets of the West and be beholden to the West for everything. And, you know, which is exactly what the Russian narrative will be. But there will naturally be tensions, but I don't see any other choice.
You know, in Ukraine, we also tell, don't say op before you jump. So now we are in the middle of the war. There have been very huge successes with the counteroffensive. But it really feels now we are getting stuck in war for longer than everybody was expecting. And it's still hard to predict how things will develop. What will be the price of regaining the territory? That's also very frightening topic for many people, and so on. Yeah.
So yeah, my opinion of this is that, and just I know my viewers will have heard this before, but the idea is that with the incorrect information, Putin and his top command decided to go into Ukraine to depose the government. It was like a 2 to 15 day thing. So it literally was a special military operation. That's what it was. It's like, right, we're going to go in, get rid of Zelensky, put our own government in, clear everything up. It'll take 15 days max, and then job done. And then and the Ukrainians will welcome us with open arms and bunches of flowers. That never happened. And then the Ukrainians said, no, you guys can jog on. And it became a fight. So then they were involved in a war that they were not prepared for and they did not plan for. And so therefore, from that point on, I said Russia cannot win. There is no way that Putin can win because Ukraine don't want him and them to be there. And if they don't want him and them to be there, the only thing you can do is either completely occupy the country or go away. But although he can't win, he won't lose, which means he won't step back and say, right, I'm going to cut my losses and leave. So then you're left with this horrible situation of like, right, Putin cannot win. There doesn't seem to be an off-ramp because Ukraine aren't prepared to say, yeah, you can have the Donbas and yeah, you can have the Crimea. So that's probably not going to happen, in which case there is no way out. So how does this end? Where does this go? How do you see it going? Is my analysis broadly correct or not? And how do you see it going? That's a huge question.
I see the logical solution of this war in a complex. It's not only about Ukraine, but this is about the entire geopolitical situation, let's say, to minimum in this part of the world. Together with Ukraine, there has to be resolved Transnistria. Like, nobody wants to leave part of Russia being sandwiched between Moldova and Ukraine, right? Like, this is number one. Number two, I guarantee that after the war on the Ukrainian soil will be finished, there will be another military confrontation in Belarus. You will see it. Like, Belarus cannot be stuck inside Central Europe as a Russian puppet as you see it now. Like,
that's a good point.
There are so many Belarusian people already outside of Belarus. They hate Lukashenko. 2 years ago, there was massive protests against him. This is part of the package, like, definitely the Belarus, and like the tip of this cake will be the Kaliningrad Oblast. Europeans are smart enough, I hope, not to leave Kaliningrad, like this nuclear arsenal station, inside the Baltics. Like, this all has to be resolved within one single, probably a few year or a decade year, big process with some escalation, with some coming down and so on. So for me as a Ukrainian, it's pity to say this. Obviously, I would like the war to finish tomorrow and do everything what we've been doing before. But for the good of our civilization, this has to be settled. First, Ukraine, including Crimea, Donbas. Second, Transnistria. Third, Belarus. Fourth, Kaliningrad. And the juiciest fifth step will be the dissolution of Russian Federation and its present form. Russia remain as the last true empire where at least a third of population are not ethnically Russians. And they would like to have some more autonomy and their own identification. So this will be the cascade of steps, I believe, in the forthcoming future.
That's fascinating. What a fascinating discussion this is. Thank you so much, Orest. I really do appreciate this. Yeah, and I can now see that. I hadn't really considered, but it would of course be beneficial if all that gets resolved in one fell swoop. But that is, as you say, arguably a long process. I mean, some of the options for the resolution here might be, Putin having his health conditions, manifest in him like dying or becoming too ill to rule. You could have a coup, you could have a revolution. What do you think? Do you think there's enough? Do you think the Russian population has the ability, because there's a lot of internal security in Russia, has the ability to stand up to Putin, or do you think that would just never happen?
They already proved this year that this is not going to happen within this form. Also, if you look historically, very, very rarely there are some protests in Russia. Like the recent one happened in 1917 when there was a Russian Revolution, like over 100 years ago, and it didn't actually finish with anything better because the Soviet Union was created. So I am afraid that even if Ukraine, with all the modern weapons from the West, will restore its integrity, capturing Crimea, Donbas, defending the entire border, this will be another few years when Russia will invade again. That's like if the political system of the country or even the borders of the country will not be changed, because there'll be another Putin, and this war is not only about Putin himself. People forget that he receives majority support from population, and his support now is even bigger than it used to be exactly 1 year ago before the invasion.
And that support is being fed. That support is being fed brainwashed narrative. I mean, when you listen to the opinions of some of the people even in Moscow, but in places around Russia, saying, what's your opinion on the war? What's your opinion on Ukrainian people? It's just like expletive after expletive, and just like using racial slurs against Ukrainians. And I know that happens the other way as well, but the idea is that there's an awful lot of Russian people who believe Ukrainians are just terrible human beings, they're all Nazis, and it's all terrible over there. I remember someone was saying the other day that there was a POW that was arrested that saw that people still spoke Russian in Ukraine and it wasn't banned. He's like, we were told that it was banned in Ukraine. It's like, so there's just a complete misunderstanding of what Ukraine is within inside Russia, which then gives you an understanding of why Putin can get away with doing this, because of course he's controlling that narrative himself. So it's like breaking all of these things down is necessary for solving this problem. I don't know, I'm starting to rant now, but
what can I say? That's unfortunately like this, the justification of this war was a very popular topic in the beginning when people were trying to understand why it happened, and those objectives about denazifying Ukraine is the most funny, and it has the easiest answer. Like, our president is Jewish. Like, how the Jewish president could be in the Nazi country? So there is like no continuation of this discussion at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's some analysts that recently been saying that there's no way that there could even be a Russian resolution to Ukraine with keeping Crimea. Just Crimea cannot remain not part of Ukraine, and Ukraine's success going forward is inextricably linked to Crimea being part of it. It's just a hugely important part of the whole Ukrainian country as a whole, and there are lots of ways of looking at that. But I mean, do you know much about Crimea? I know you're from Lviv and whatnot, but what's your obviously lots about Crimea, but in terms of, because actually there's some to say that there's an identity of people from Crimea, and that you've got an interesting history of the Tatars there, and all sorts of stuff going on that means these things are never as simple as you might think. And then you've got Russians being bussed into Crimea after 2014, and so then you've got people that are feeling pro-Russia. So there's a whole mix of feelings of people in Crimea. But in terms of Ukraine as a whole country and its success, is Crimea absolutely crucial for the success of Ukraine?
The identity of people who live in Crimea have been changing every 100 years since Hellenistic times. When Greek merchants settled along the southern coast. And just for you to know that the island of Cyclop is from Odyssea is actually a Crimea. So it's really part of the entire ancient world. Then Conan the Barbarian, the Cimmerian were settling the northern steppes of Crimea. Ottomans, Tatars, you name it. It was like on this north Black Coast and Black Sea coast. It was this Eurasian steppe where all the tribes were going back and forth, including Attila the Goon. So it was always in the middle of this huge global movement.
Which goes to say, sorry, I'm interrupting, but it goes to say to the Russians who say, well, Crimea has always been part of Russia, or it was a mistake that it was given to Ukraine. It's like, yeah, but it wasn't. History isn't like that, and it wasn't yours necessarily originally. And what is a boundary and what is a national border, and so on and so forth.
Russia took control over Crimea in late 18th century when after the Russo-Ottoman War, and since then they founded Sevastopol, but actually Sevastopol was already built over many other cities that appeared there, starting with Chersones. And I personally visited the ruins of ancient Greek Chersones. There are still these, Greek columns over there in the middle of Sevastopol. So it was you capture the territory, you build over it up, and obviously a single person or a single politician, they will look back within their scope of view. It is in the interest of Russia to tell that the history starts with Peter the Great, for example, or Catherine the Great, who did that one. So they were in the control over Crimea since late 18th century. However, the native population of Crimea, and native here meaning starting from 13th century, since the Mongol invasion, were the local Crimean Tatars that were the majority population. So when during World War II, Hitler came all the way to Volgograd, to Stalingrad, and pushed back, when the Soviet Union was recapturing back the territories of that area from Crimea, they deported 100% of local native Tatar population and resettled them with Russians. Also, many Ukrainians were pushing down to do the farmland and so on in those territories, And then in 1954, because of landlocking within the Soviet Union, Crimea was attached to Ukrainian Soviet Republic. So it's very interesting to hear from the words of Elon Musk that or other people mistake of Khrushchev. First of all, Khrushchev was ethnically Ukrainian, and he did not grant Crimea to Ukrainian Soviet Republic because he was Ukrainian and he wanted to make a gift. No, it was a typical economical reason, because you could connect it with the channels to provide water and to continue normal economical development of the country, And then in 1991, we have new countries, we have international law, we have the United Nations, we have the recognition of all the countries. Crimea is part of Ukraine, and you cannot simply, invade another country and grab a piece of land of it. So that's the story. In terms of Crimea had the autonomy within the within Ukraine. So it just depends which what we are talking here. Are we talking about a will to do anything, or we have some mutually agreed rules to play and so on? So in a civilized world, obviously we have to play according to the international standards, and according to this, obviously Crimea is part of Ukraine without any disputation.
Yeah, before I get on to give you your introduction of who you are and what your background is, because we haven't done that yet, I just thought we'd do it in reverse. We'll do that last. So someone here who is broadly, I think, pro-Russian has said, right now the territories are close to what was last agreed with the Minsk agreements. Why don't you make peace now and close it? And it's this whole idea that, well, you know, the Minsk agreements, but then you could talk about the Budapest memorandum and so on and so forth before that. So what would you say to people who talk about the Minsk agreements? Just a really quick, I suppose, summary of what they were and how that impacts what's going on now.
For those people who claim to agree and make the peace, I would answer the following. You're living in the neighborhood in your own house, and you have another neighbor next to you, also like in a little bit bigger house, right? And eventually, like one day, your neighbor decides, like, let me crash into the kitchen. So he crashed down into your kitchen, you know, rapes your daughter, takes a hostage like your cousin, and tells you, okay, let's agree. I stay in the kitchen. This is also my house, but you stay in your house. Like, let's settle on this. Like, would you buy it? Or maybe first you would like to push him out of your kitchen. Once he will be behind his fence, you restore the status quo, and then you have to build up a platform around it.
Yeah, I mean, that I would agree with that. But then, how would you say the Minsk agreements got signed, and what did they entail?
I believe here you have to help me a little bit. There was this settlement in Donbas. I don't really remember well, what was there, but as far as I remember, the member of the party in Minsk agreement was a pro-Russian guy, like Medvedchuk, right? And he didn't act in the interest of Ukraine, because it's not even politically, but Medvedchuk, Putin is the godson of one of Medvedchuk's children. Yeah. So let's say, okay, this is might be the fault of Ukraine on some particular period, yeah. But this person was like the true representative of Russia within Ukraine. So
yeah. So it really wasn't in the best interest of Ukraine, and it's kind of redressing that balance. And of course, you can go back to the Budapest memorandum, where Russia was supposed to protect Ukraine, and we'll have your nuclear missiles and we'll protect you. Okay, we'll give you the nuclear missiles. Oh, we've invaded you 20 years later or whatever.
Yeah. So the Budapest memorandum, all the other agreements, even if you take a look on the development of other wars, at a certain point, there was an agreement, and then some party was kind of justifying somehow how to go around it, or even brutally violate that prior agreement. So here we are talking about the brutal power, and unfortunately we reached the point, and this becomes absolutely clear to everybody that in the end of the line, power wins. Unfortunately, diplomacy, power, and so on. But we are back to ancient instincts, when the stronger has more truth and more rights. And at this very moment, it's just on the battlefield, it will be resolved. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you're thinking about things like Minsk agreements, between someone who's vastly more powerful, it's like, well, any kind of agreement is usually going to be in favor of the big powerful guy in the room there. So yeah, there's an imbalance there. Okay, as we meander towards the end, Orest, and this has been fabulous. Thank you so much. And it'd be great if we could speak again. I don't know if you're ever up for that.
I will tell you, it's very likely during February I might visit United Kingdom, so maybe you can have even in personal meeting.
Oh no, fabulous! That'd be amazing. That'd be amazing. So, who are you? What's your background? It's so weird to do this at the end. What's your background?
You can cut it and put to the beginning.
No, I love it this way. This is how I roll. So, and then what are your skills that you are able to bring to what you do with your channel? Why are you doing your channel? All that kind of stuff.
Okay, so I am native to Lviv. This is my hometown. I was born here. Yeah. And I studied university. I studied law over here and did quite a few international internships abroad, including Europe, India, and so on. However, I didn't work as a lawyer, even though I wanted to pursue the career in the United Nations and those other things. Anyway, it was very challenging to follow the bureaucratic path. And since the last 10 years, I'm blogging and I'm traveling the world. So I visited over 120 countries around the world with Ukrainian passport, as a Ukrainian, and as the guy who always was based in Lviv. However, for 5-6 months a year, I was somewhere around in the world. My blogs are mainly about self-help topic, travel, and online marketing for Ukrainian audience. And thanks to this, I developed a large network of friends in most countries around the world, I believe. But when the war in Ukraine was about to escalate, we're talking about February 2024, I was in Karabakh. So basically, I was seeing the devastating results of the decade-long conflict between Azerbaijan and Armenia. This was an interesting group of international journalists and bloggers, yes. And from there, I flew back to Ukraine to participate in our resistance. So basically, I arrived 4 days before the invasion, when those who wanted were fleeing the country. And when Russian rockets started flying over our country, I knew exactly what I will do once it starts. I started English language channels in all different platforms and started reporting from the ground. So basically, I don't focus on analytical things like we are doing now. I don't keep track on battlefield progress from day to day. I would prefer actually go to places by myself and experience the area personally, which unfortunately doesn't have a wide reach to the large audience, but it makes much more sense to me.
Yeah, so you get that experiential thing going, and that's really important. It gives people an insight into the places they see on a map. You know, I talk about lines on a map, and that's why so often I want to show them even if it's the hellscape of Mariinka, I want to say, look, this isn't just a line on a map. This is a very real place with very real people who have died and all this destruction. In what you've done, have you found that your opinion on anything has changed? What you've seen has made you rethink anything?
So first of all, it was very eye-opening experience for me to see how the international media work. So just to give you a perspective, I was present in Bucha during exhumation of people. So basically, I've seen dozens of people being digged down from the ground with all the smell, and so on. I visited rocket launch sites hours after it happened, speaking to relatives whose beloved one died there, for example. And I noticed how the international media works. So out of all picture, they crop the very emotional and very frightening moment, like a corpse, like granny crying and so on, and they show this to the entire world without explaining the background, without actually explaining what really happened, there, which like it triggers emotions, but it doesn't provide explanation to people. And most people around the world watch it like a movie, like a cartoon. Like, do you remember the movie with the Jim Carrey, but he was living in this bubble?
Truman Show. Yeah, the
Truman Show. Like like Truman escaped, everybody like, okay, let's find another cartoon. So this makes me feel pretty sad, because I take things very personally, and even when I traveled to Africa, I traveled to Iraqi Kurdistan, where they also fight for independence. I try to understand the background, and this approach is all about clicks, all about more negative topic as opposed to in-depth topic. And this what drives the attention of like 8 billion people around the world. So people don't really understand exactly what's happening.
So that's very interesting. So you got to see international news media for what it essentially is, which is not so much a service to explain the news, but infotainment in a way.
It
Possibly.
is, but there are two parts of the coin here.
Yeah, so that is simplistic, and there are some that are better than others, of course.
Yeah, but also, let's assume there is a top executive during the coffee break somewhere in the city of London, sitting watching the news, and he see this granny crying. He like, oh, maybe I donate a little bit, or maybe I will support this counselor who is voting for decision to provide tanks for Ukraine. So it does its job. It does the job. With a very long chain of events. It was just very, because it happened in my country, I'm taking this very, very personally. And sometimes, let's say, there is like a dead body, like somebody died since the explosion. Like something similar would happen in Dnipro, like 2 days ago, and you see like a guy lying and his mother is hugging him, crying, and the journalist is trying to take the best possible angle to take a picture. Like that drives me crazy, like really.
Yeah, I do wonder about that sometimes, about how intrusive people.
But this is important. Like professionally, this is important. On the human level, I couldn't handle that one. Also, what I realized is that how adaptable creatures humans are. Like, Lviv is the normal Western standard city with public transport system, with Wi-Fi. Like now, for example, it is blackout in our city. But because I have this like portable power station, I put there like Wi-Fi and I can talk, guys, to
Oh, that's very good. Thanks.
Yeah,
mate.
and I can hear power generators operating on the streets around, because the Apple store in the ground floor of my building is continuing selling Apple products, and in order to keep things running, they bought a power generator which is working on diesel, and they simply put it off on the street, turn it on, and they have light. So these things happening. But on the other side, during my recent trip to the east, I visited Izum, for example. Izum was a stronghold of Russian occupation for quite some time. It's situated in a very important strategic part where the river makes the curves, and there is like the hill. Anyway, and the city is like 80% destroyed. And when I was there was no electricity, no water supply, no gas supply, and internet only selectively on the elevated areas of the town. And somehow people were living there. They were adjusting, they were coming back, cooking on the stoves outside next to the nice mansion. So it doesn't matter like how bad it gets. After some time, people kind of adapt to this, which doesn't mean it is good. It's rather the tragedy of the reality, how quickly we can adapt to things. And if it goes for the fair amount of time, it becomes normalish, which is also strange. And then everybody lives in a parallel reality. So in Britain, people drive on the left side of the road, which is crazy for most population on our Earth.
Well, most population can still be wrong, but no. But in all seriousness, like
that was very small explanation. But
no, because I'm fascinated by this, but because you see, still people have still been living in Solidar and Bakhmut as well. Like, what are you doing? Like, but and actually, this is something, and we probably don't have enough time for this now. But this is something.
So I have explained. This is like also part of the answer what I reconsidered. So those
I was going to say, can I just predict maybe, and tell me if I'm right or wrong, but I've heard that it's generally the poorest, the oldest, the most vulnerable who end up getting left in these places. The people who can move do move. They've got enough money, if they've got enough youth and health, they do go. But therefore, it's the most vulnerable who are left. And then, you know, the war culminates or comes to its like climax in these places like Bakhmut and Soledar, and they're still bloody living there, and it's wow. But anyway, sorry, yeah.
This is exactly true, what you told. Those people who remain in the war zone areas are who could not leave, who for some circumstances didn't want because they have somebody who depend on them, who don't have enough understanding that they actually can go somewhere else. And also there are like in those areas on the front line, which are like in Bakhmut, for example, there are still even some pro-Russian people living as well. So they are waiting for Russia to come. This is also possible.
Yes, I had heard that. Yeah,
because most like Ukrainian government was advising officially to leave, because when population is leaving, they make the work of the military easier. So the military doesn't have to put much attention to preserve the population, which is the priority for our army. So for any reason, if people don't leave, there are questions why they are staying there.
Yeah. Thank you for that. Yeah. So, but again, the point is that it's amazing, as you say, that they can adapt to living literally in a war zone. I mean, it's not like they're living near it and they don't have power and they're living in a basement with shells dropping around them. Just like, wow, just insane. So just before we sort of wrap up, I guess what I wanted to ask was, what is your greatest worry going forward? And what gives you the most hope?
The greatest worry, I worry that it will take very long, and then this conflict will become a long-lasting, a decade-long conflict. This is what I worry, and I worry for this to take longer than even one generation. Like this is what really frightens me, because if there is instability and if there is active war happening, no investments, no normal predictable life is possible, unfortunately. So this is what I worry about, for this to take too long, and too long means years. Yeah. And in contrast to that, I really hope that with the Western support, with the Western army aid and everything, we will finish this as soon as possible with the victory of Ukraine. That's my hope as well.
Yeah. Oh well. Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. And I would agree with both of those. I mean, it is the threat of a protracted war that goes on for a very long time would lose the interest of a lot of Western help and would play. I mean, this is arguably what Putin is now aiming for.
And this is also, this puts a danger on the entire Ukrainian nation. So just to give for people the perspective, at this very moment, there are approximately 12 million Ukrainians living outside of Ukraine, with 8 of them left during the last year. It's a huge migration. This is a decrease with 25% of the entire population of our country. Now, within Ukraine, there are less than 30 million people, even though before last, like 1 year ago, there was over 40 million people. And in 1991, when Ukraine proclaimed independence from the Soviet Union, there were 52 million people.
Wow.
So our nation is #1 nation in the world by the absolute numbers of losing population, which is scary. I did some calculations, and I did like a big post recently, that it's very likely that nowadays, like today, Ukrainians can be the second largest migrant nation in the world after Indians. with 12 million Ukrainians living outside of their own country. And if this war drags on, it means that those 12 million who are now outside will have zero reasons or very little reasons to come back, which means in the long run killing a nation.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about. And this is the reality which we are facing in the long run if this will drag on. That's the sad story. And if we look back for hundreds of years, Armenians, Circassians, Kurds, then recently there was a big scandal in Australia that Rohingya nation people were found on the coast of Australia, that they've been exterminated from Myanmar. This is happening all around, and it was happening all around for the last millennials. It just feels like now, if we will do a good job, and if the world, the civilized world will make a good job, Ukrainians will survive. We will eventually connect with the rest of the global Western world. And we are already. So it really feels eventually we were like accepted, and it feels very good, because now you can proudly tell I'm Ukrainian all around the world, and you'll have a green light everywhere. We proved our right to participate in the global matters. Now we have to save it. And if we succeed, and I really do hope that we will live happily with the rest of the Western family, where we truly belong. Because the first Russian, like, let's say, grab on Ukraine happened in the middle of the 17th century. Before that, Ukrainians were always part of European countries. Never were looking back to the east. It was always going west. So basically, this is only last, 350 years. Before that, for 1,000 years, Ukrainians, in the modern sense of this word, was part of a European group of nationalities.
But I guess the most important thing, and this is what I would say, is actually looking back, it doesn't matter which direction you were looking in, it's where you, as people with self-determination, as you should be, want to look. Like, it doesn't matter where you looked 100 years ago, 500 years ago. It's like, if you guys want to look towards Europe now, then you should have the democratic right to do so. And it shouldn't be up to anyone else to say that you have no right to be part of Europe or to be part of NATO. It's if you are an independent sovereign nation, then that is your right. And even if you're not, there's still the idea of self-determination through democratic principles. You should be able to establish what you desire of your country. So, really, I mean, I'm completely agreeing with you, obviously, but it's about who you are now. And you have clearly, you guys, like Ukraine, has clearly put themselves on the map, or perhaps Putin has put Ukraine on the map, and it has backfired against his ideals, as we talked about at the beginning.
Absolutely. I believe we already proved who we are and where we would like to go.
Absolutely. Well, look, as and thank you so much for this. It's been fascinating. I've absolutely loved it. You've done a load of good work, and I'm just going to put up your channel again on your YouTube channel. Tell us where people can find you. I know you've done so much work for looking at refugees, looking at people who've been fighting, looking at people who are living in occupied areas or living in recently liberated areas even. And you always sort of, if you want to help, do this. So first of all, where can people find you? Secondly, if people want to help, what's one of the best ways that you think people can help? And I know we're flooded in the information space of ways that we can help Ukraine, and we kind of have to pick through what we think will be the best use of time and money or whatever. But so what would you suggest?
So first of all, it's very easy to find me, and thanks, Jonathan, for providing a platform for that. My name is Orest Zub, so Orest like forest without F. Very easy to remember. In English language, in every platform, you can find me very easy. YouTube, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, you name it. Secondly, if by any chance you will be visiting Ukraine, and I know that there are different humanitarians, press people, researchers, if you are in Lviv, just write me before that. Most probably I'm flexible enough to have a coffee with you or some drink. Then I will be more than happy to participate in similar shows on your platforms, because this is actually what I'm doing in order to spread the message of Ukraine, news, private channels, and so on. So we'll be happy to do so. Actively, I'm traveling around Europe or other countries, doing this kind of stuff as well. So probably starting from spring and all the way this year, I'll be actively participating in different events around European Union. So please invite. I can give the perspective on that one as well. I am happy to feature you in any of my materials if you do something related to Ukraine in different sense, on media, humanitarian topics, and so on. Please reach me out. We'll find connections how we can, feature each other, or I will provide happily my platform for you as well. And we'll talk, Jonathan, about this behind the scenes probably as well. And regarding the support, there are different ways, and I always think what will be the most effective way in order to achieve the best result. The best result in this situation is the end of the war by victory of Ukraine and the entire liberal West. Yeah, this is fully dependent on international support. So, if this video, affect you and you vote for politicians, for your councils on the local level who affect the national decisions to support Ukraine, that will be the best support. This is the biggest leverage what we can do. So please stay aware and support those politicians within your region, within your electoral area, which completely support Ukraine. Because at this stage of the war, unfortunately, this is only the armor part. Most of the humanitarian things happened. We saved as much people as we could. They settled down in one of your countries, and I'm very grateful for that. Now it's mostly about the military, unfortunately. Second, take a look around within your scope of view, which organization is doing something. If they support somehow the military, this is the number one priority. If they do humanitarian stuff, medical, this is also important to save lives. You can donate directly to them. Yeah, that's the way.
That's brilliant. Well, thank you so much, and thank you for your time. Lots of people commenting. I already had a dream holiday in Ukraine, moving about by train, but watching Orest has added so many more places as she's seen you on your channel to go to all these different places. Someone randomly here, if you can afford it, Ukrainian made e-bike based in Munich, Vector e-bikes, great quality, great fun. So, but anyway, and thank you very much for the support of this channel. Thanks 10K, really appreciate that. Look, thank you, Orest. It honestly has been fascinating. It's great to get a Ukrainian view on these things, because so often we're looking at Western media who are interpreting Ukraine in a way that possibly doesn't do justice to the history, the culture, and the ideas of Ukraine and Ukrainians. So I really appreciate that. Thank you to all the people who have watched this. I know that it's probably not a great time for people in America, which is 80% of my audience, as you're still asleep, and some of you are just waking up by the looks of it. But hopefully this will get you to go and follow Orest's work and to support all the fabulous stuff he is doing. Hopefully, we'll get together again in the future. Just thank you so much. Very last words, mate.
Thanks for staying with Ukraine. The world have never seen such a big unification in the recent decades as we are seeing now. And let's stay together to make this world a much better place. And glory to Ukraine, and real huge thanks to all of you.
Absolutely awesome. Well, thanks, mate, and appreciate this to everyone else. Stay on the line, Orest, but for the rest of you, really appreciate you spending the time with us. You take care, and remember, support Ukraine in all the ways that you possibly can. Fabulous.
Bye bye.